Eleanor Mercer slammed the leather ledger down on Cole Mercer's desk so hard the oil lamp rattled, and every man in that room went silent. "Your foreman has been stealing from you for 3 years," she said. "And you've been too proud to notice." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Cole Mercer, the man they called the hardest rancher in all of Kansas, looked up from his chair at the woman standing before him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. If this story moves you, if you've ever been counted out, dismissed, or treated like you were worth less than you knew you were, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Eleanor's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Because what happens next in Blackstone Ranch in the autumn of 1878 is something none of them, not Cole, not the foreman, not the whole town of Harlan Creek, ever saw coming. The morning Eleanor arrived at Blackstone Ranch, the sky was the color of old iron, and the wind came in low across the Kansas grass like it was looking for something to knock down. She stepped off the wagon before it fully stopped. Not because she was in a hurry, because she had learned in the last 2 years of her life that waiting for other people to help you off things only gave them the opportunity to leave you sitting there. Her suitcase was not heavy. There was almost nothing in it. A change of dress, a worn Bible she no longer opened, a set of kitchen knives wrapped in oilcloth that had belonged to her mother, and a folded document she kept close to her chest at all times, the only piece of paper in the world that proved she was who she said she was, and owed what she said she didn't. The ranch hand who'd driven the supply wagon from town didn't say a word to her the entire 3-hour ride. He'd looked at her once when she'd climbed up beside him in Harlan Creek, looked at the width of her shoulders, the fullness of her frame beneath the faded brown dress, and he'd made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite a word. Eleanor had settled onto the bench, set her suitcase between her feet, and stared straight ahead for 3 hours without blinking more than necessary. She had learned not to let those sounds land on her. You let a sound like that land, it took root. She didn't have room for anything else taking root in her anymore. Blackstone Ranch was larger than she'd been told. The main house sat back from the road behind a stretch of dry packed earth, 2 stories of weathered timber, with a long porch running the front of it. To the left, 3 outbuildings and a stable. Beyond that, pasture rolling out toward the horizon until it blurred into sky. Cattle somewhere in the distance, she could hear them. She stood at the edge of the yard with her suitcase and looked at it all and thought, there is work here, real work, enough work to fill every hour she needed to fill. That was all she needed it to be. "You the widow they sent from town." The voice came from behind her. She turned. A man in his 40s, thick-set, with a sun-cracked face and a foreman's air of authority that he wore like a second hat. He was looking at her the same way the wagon driver had, except with more words attached to it. "Eleanor Mercer," she said. "I'm here about the cook position." "Figured." He didn't offer his name. "I'm Holt. I run the operations here." He looked her up and down with the kind of open appraisal that men in positions of small authority felt entitled to make. "You got experience cooking for a crew this size?" "I've cooked for larger. Ranch hands aren't polite about bad food." "I don't make bad food." Holt made that sound not quite a word and turned toward the main house. "Kitchen's round back. Mrs. Pryor's been handling meals since the last cook left. She'll show you what's what. Mr. Mercer will decide if you stay." "When do I meet Mr. Mercer?" Holt glanced back over his shoulder. "When he decides to meet you." Eleanor picked up her suitcase and followed him toward the house. The kitchen was large, which was one good thing, and it was a disaster, which was the other thing she noticed. Not dirty. Someone had made an effort at clean, but disordered in the specific way that happened when multiple people had been managing a space without a system. Supplies stacked without logic. A flour barrel sitting open. Dried beans in 4 different containers for no visible reason. A list of provisions tacked to the wall that hadn't been updated in what looked like months. Mrs. Pryor was a slight woman in her 60s with tired eyes and capable hands, and the expression of someone who had been managing a crisis for so long, she'd forgotten it was a crisis. "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Pryor said when she saw Eleanor. Then she seemed to catch herself, as if gratitude toward a stranger might be premature. "I mean, We've been short a cook. I can see that. Eleanor set her suitcase down and looked around the kitchen properly. Not judging. Cataloging. How many hands do you feed? 14 most days. Sometimes 17 when the seasonal workers come through. 3 meals. Breakfast and supper. Lunch they take in the field. Eleanor nodded. She walked to the provision list on the wall and studied it. Then she walked to the supply shelves and checked what was actually there against what the list said should be there. The numbers didn't match. Not by a little. By enough to mean something. This list, Eleanor said. When was it last reconciled with what's actually in the stores? Mrs. Pryor's tired eyes shifted slightly. Holt manages the ordering. I'm sure he does, Eleanor said, and kept her voice entirely neutral. I'm asking when the list was last checked against actual inventory. I wouldn't know. Eleanor folded the list carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Mrs. Pryor watched her do it, but didn't say anything. She cooked supper that evening from what was there. Beef stew with biscuits. A dried apple compote strong coffee. Nothing complicated. She wasn't performing. She was feeding people, which was a different thing entirely. The ranch hands came in with the low noise of tired men who had spent a day doing hard physical work and were thinking about food and sleep and nothing else. They sat down, they ate, and something shifted in the room about halfway through the meal. It was subtle. The conversation changed register. Someone asked for a second biscuit. 2 men who had been sitting in silence started talking. Good food did that. Eleanor had always known it. It wasn't magic. It was just that hunger was a kind of noise that sat under everything else, and when you fed it properly, the noise went quiet and people could hear themselves think. She was cleaning the kitchen after supper when she heard boots on the back porch and looked up to find a man in the doorway who she had not seen before. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked rather than men who watched others work. Dark hair gone gray at the temples. A face that had been weathered into something austere, not unkind, but closed the way a window is closed. Not against anything in particular. Just closed by habit. He looked at her without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "You're the new cook." Eleanor Mercer. She didn't stop wiping down the work table. "You're Mr. Mercer. Cole." He said it like a correction, but not an unfriendly one. He looked around the kitchen. It's cleaner than it was this morning. It'll be more organized by morning. He seemed to consider that. The men ate well tonight. They'll eat well every night. He was quiet again for a moment. He had a way of silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't the silence of a man who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of a man who didn't see the point in saying something until he meant it. Holt says you asked about the provisions list, Cole said. Eleanor set down the cloth and looked at him directly. The list doesn't match the stores. There are significant discrepancies. Holt manages the ordering. It's his department. I understand that, she said. I'm telling you what I observed. Cole's expression didn't change, but something moved behind it. A recalibration of some kind. He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than a glance. You've been here one afternoon, he said. Yes. And you're already telling me there's a problem with my foreman's department. I'm telling you what I observed, she said again evenly. What you do with it is your business. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he said, breakfast at 5:30, and walked back out the door. Eleanor turned back to the kitchen and kept cleaning. She did not sleep well that first night. The bunkhouse room they'd given her was cold, and the mattress had seen better decades, but she was used to not sleeping well. She used the wakeful hours the way she'd taught herself to use them, going over what she'd seen, organizing it, thinking through what came next. She had been hired because they were desperate. She understood that. There was no illusion in her about the warmth of the welcome or the security of the position. She was here because 14 men needed to eat, and no one else had shown up to feed them. That was enough. It was, in fact, exactly the kind of situation she had always been able to work with. Because Eleanor Mercer had learned something in 34 years of being in a body that other people felt entitled to judge. Before she'd said a word, she had learned that people who underestimate you hand you an extraordinary gift. They stop watching. They stop guarding. They leave doors open that they would slam shut in the face of someone they considered a threat. And Eleanor had always known how to walk through an open door. She was up before 4. She took the provisions list from her pocket and spent an hour doing what she hadn't had time to do the evening before a full, careful reconciliation. Every shelf, every barrel, every sack and tin and bundle. She wrote the actual numbers in her own neat hand next to the numbers on the list and set the 2 columns side by side. The gap was not small. It was not the gap of sloppy record-keeping, though she supposed someone would say it was. It was consistent in a specific direction. Items that had been ordered and paid for that were not in the stores. Items whose costs had been recorded at prices higher than she recognized from her own years of purchasing. Small amounts individually, but added up over what looked like 2 years of purchasing records, she found tucked in a box near the provision shelf added up. It was not small at all. She put everything back exactly where she'd found it. She made a copy of her numbers in a small notebook she kept in her apron. And then she made breakfast. Eggs, salt pork, fried potatoes, bread she'd set to rise the night before. The kitchen smelled like something worth waking up for, which she had always believed was a cook's first and most important job. The men came in like tired shadows and left like people. Holt came in last and looked at her with eyes that had a specific quality. She recognized the look of a man checking to see how much you knew. She served him without any change in her expression because she had learned young that your face was a currency, and you did not spend it carelessly. "Settling in all right?" he said. Not a friendly question, a surveillance question. "Very well, thank you," she said. "Kitchen to your liking?" "I'm working on the organization." "The ordering system works fine," he said. "Been running the same way for 2 years." "I'm sure it has," Eleanor said, and went back to the stove. In the week that followed, she learned the ranch the way she learned every kitchen she'd ever worked in, not by being told, but by watching. By paying attention to what moved and what didn't, what was used and what was stored, what was needed and what was being wasted. She learned which hands worked hardest and ate the most. She learned which ones were struggling and needed something solid at the end of the day. She learned the rhythms of the operation, the way you learn a piece of music, not by being handed the sheet, but by listening until you could hear the melody beneath the noise. She fixed the wasteful practices quietly. The breakfast portions had been haphazard, some men getting too little, some too much food going cold before it was served. She adjusted the timing. She changed the grain order to a supplier whose prices she'd verified were honest. She reorganized the root cellar so that what was oldest was used first and nothing rotted quietly in the back. The food got better. The food had already been good. She didn't make bad food, but it got better in the way that things get better when a system is running correctly. The men ate well, which meant they slept well, which meant they worked well. The mood in the bunkhouse shifted. She heard it at meals. The conversations were easier, less tight. Men laughed more. She said nothing about any of this to Cole. She was not here to report. She was here to cook, and to observe, and to wait until she understood enough to be certain. Cole Mercer ate his meals with his men, which surprised her. She had expected him to eat separately the way owners often did. But he sat at the end of the long table every evening with his plate and his coffee and his closed window face, and he listened to the conversation around him without contributing much to it, and Eleanor, serving from the kitchen doorway, began to understand that this was how he managed the ranch, not by separating himself from it, but by being present in it constantly, reading it the way you read weather. He was good at what he did. She could see that. The land was well managed, the cattle healthy, the hands respected him in the way men respect someone who is genuinely competent rather than merely powerful. But there was something wrong underneath all of it, a slow drain she could feel in the financial patterns she was piecing together, and he hadn't seen it because he was looking outward at land and livestock and weather while the problem was happening in the numbers. It was on a Tuesday evening in the third week that she made her decision. She had everything she needed. The notebook was full, the pattern was clear. She waited until the supper dishes were done and the kitchen was quiet, and she knew Cole would be in his study, which was what he did in the evenings. She had learned his habits the same way she learned everything else. She knocked on the study door. "Come." She walked in with the notebook and with the original provisions list, and with 2 years of purchasing records she had carefully organized into a sequence that told a story, and she set them on the desk in front of him. Cole looked at the papers. Then he looked at her. "Sit down, Mrs. Mercer," he said. She sat. "Tell me what I'm looking at," she told him. She walked him through it clearly and without drama. The discrepancies, the inflated prices, the missing inventory, the pattern that was consistent across 2 years of records in a direction that could not be explained by error. She showed him the math. She showed him the suppliers she'd cross-referenced with. She showed him what she estimated the total shortfall to be over the period she'd been able to examine. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't dismiss her. He sat back in his chair with his hands folded and his closed window face very still, and he listened with the same quality of attention he brought to listening at supper, reading what was underneath the words. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "You've been here 3 weeks, he said. "Yes. And in 3 weeks you found this." "I wasn't looking for it," she said. "It made itself visible. The provisions list was left accessible. The purchasing records were in the kitchen. No one made any effort to conceal them from the cook because no one expected the cook to read them." Another silence. Cole looked at the papers on his desk, and something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of a man confronting something he had suspected without letting himself know he suspected it. "Holt has been with this ranch for 6 years, he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "What you're describing would mean he's been systematically—" "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "You understand what you're asking me to do with this?" "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said with a steadiness she had built from years of needing it. "I'm showing you what's there. What you do is entirely your decision." Cole Mercer picked up the notebook and read it again slowly from the beginning. Eleanor sat across from him and waited. She was very good at waiting. She had learned that patience was not the same as passivity. Patience was the act of staying present, while other people caught up to what you already knew. When he set the notebook down, his face had changed in a way she couldn't entirely read, harder and softer at the same time somehow. A man looking at something he couldn't unknow. "I'll need to verify this," he said. "Of course. Through channels that don't alert Holt." "That would be my recommendation," she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, and stopped. "Yes." "Why?" he said. "You've been here 3 weeks. You have no stake in this ranch's finances. You could have seen this and said nothing. It would have been far simpler for you." Eleanor thought about that. She thought about what to say, and what was actually true, and whether they were the same thing. Then she said, "Because someone has been bleeding this ranch dry for 2 years, and no one stopped them. And I am not able to watch something broken and not say so. I never have been." Cole Mercer looked at her for another moment that was longer than the others. Then he said, "I'll need your notebook." "I have a copy," she said, and stood up. "Good night, Mr. Mercer." She walked back to the kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and she stood at the window in the dark, and she let herself breathe. She did not know what he would do. She had done what she could. She had been here 3 weeks, and she was still just the cook. And perhaps she would always be just the cook, and perhaps that was entirely fine. But she had walked through the open door, and in Eleanor Mercer's experience, that was always where everything began. Cole Mercer did not sleep that night. Eleanor knew this not because she watched for it, but because she heard him. The study was directly beneath her room, and the floorboards of old houses carry sound, the way water carries light, diffused but present. She heard him pacing at midnight. She heard the scrape of the desk drawer at 2 in the morning. She heard nothing after that, which was its own kind of sound. She made breakfast at 4:30 as usual. When the hands came in at 5:30, Cole was already at the table, already on his second cup of coffee, and his face had the particular quality of a man who had been awake long enough that he'd come out the other side of tired into something colder and more focused. He did not look at her differently. That was the first thing she noticed. Some men, after a conversation like the one they'd had the night before, would look at a woman differently with suspicion or with a kind of recalibrated wariness, as if she'd revealed herself to be more than they'd bargained for, and they hadn't yet decided if that was a problem. Cole looked at her exactly as he always had. Present. Measuring. Withholding judgment until judgment was warranted. She respected that more than she would have expected to. Holt came in late to breakfast that morning, which was unusual. He was typically the first man at the table. A habit of authority. You claim the space before others arrive, you're already in possession of it when they sit down. But that morning, he came in after most of the hands had already started eating, and he stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, reading the room the way men with something to protect read rooms. His eyes went to Cole first, then briefly to Eleanor at the stove. She turned back to the skillet and kept her face entirely still. "Morning," Holt said, moving to his seat. His voice had its usual texture, flat authoritative, easy with command. "Cole, looks like Dawson's fence line took some damage in the east pasture. I'll send 2 men out after breakfast." "I'll ride out myself this afternoon," Cole said. A beat. Very small. "No need. I can handle it." "I'm sure you can," Cole said. "I'd like to see the east pasture anyway." Another beat. "Suit yourself." Holt picked up his fork. Eleanor poured coffee without being asked and moved through the kitchen with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to every morning, and she did not look at Holt again, and she did not look at Cole, and the breakfast went on the way. Breakfasts do, with the noise of hungry men, and the smell of food, and the ordinary clatter of a working ranch morning. But underneath all of it something had changed. She could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it. A pressure shift. A stillness that isn't peace. The verification took Cole 4 days. She knew this because she counted. 4 days of Cole riding out at unusual hours. 4 days of him in his study past midnight. 4 days of Holt moving around the ranch with that quality of watchfulness that Eleanor recognized, the watchfulness of a man who knows something is coming and is trying to see it before it arrives. On the morning of the 4th day, Cole came into the kitchen before breakfast was served. Not at 5:30 with the hands. Earlier, when it was still just Eleanor and the quiet and the smell of bread in the oven. "Sit down, Mrs. Mercer," he said. She turned from the stove. "Breakfast will burn. I'll watch it." He moved her gently aside, not touching her, just moving into the space, and picked up the long fork and stood at the stove with the uncomfortable posture of a man who rarely cooked. "Sit down." She sat at the work table. "You were right," he said. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without ornamentation. "The numbers are worse than what you showed me. He's been pulling from the cattle sales as well, not just the provisions." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "How long?" "As near as I can tell from the beginning. Maybe longer." He turned the salt pork without looking at her. 6 years. He's been here 6 years. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say to a man sitting with the knowledge that someone he trusted for 6 years had been taking from him steadily and quietly, and counting on the certainty that no one would look close enough to see it. "I've sent a wire to my attorney in Wichita," Cole said. "He'll be here Thursday." He paused. "I need you to say nothing. To no one. Until Thursday." "Of course," she said. He turned from the stove and looked at her directly. "You understand, if Holt suspects something, this becomes significantly more complicated." "I understand." "He is not a mild man," Cole said. And there was something in the way he said it, not a warning to frighten her, but the particular precision of a man making sure she had accurate information to make decisions with. If he suspects the investigation before the attorney arrives, he may act in ways that are difficult to manage. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Mr. Mercer, I've been living quietly in close proximity to a man I know is a thief, serving him breakfast every morning and giving him absolutely nothing to read in my face. I believe I can manage 3 more days." Cole looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the place where a smile might form in a man who had not smiled easily in a long time. "I believe you can," he said. He set the fork down. "Your salt pork is going to burn." She stood and moved back to the stove and took over without comment. And Cole Mercer went and poured himself coffee, and stood at the kitchen door in the gray early morning, and said nothing further. And somehow the silence between them was easier than most conversations Eleanor had had in recent memory. The next 3 days were among the most demanding of her life, and not because of the work she could do in her sleep. The work was the simple grounding rhythm of it, the planning and the preparation and the feeding and the cleaning and the starting again. She had done that work since she was old enough to reach a stove. The work was not the difficulty. The difficulty was Holt, not because he knew anything. She was certain he didn't, not yet. But he was a man with instincts that had served him well for a long time, and instincts do not need specific information to make themselves felt. He had begun to watch her. Not obviously. Nothing so crude. But she noticed the way he positioned himself in doorways. The way his eyes moved to her when Cole entered a room. The way he asked her questions at meals that were not quite casual enough to be casual. "You settling in all right?" he asked her on the second morning, in the same words he'd used her first week, but with a different quality underneath them. "Very well," she said. "Cole treating you fairly. He can be hard to read, some people find." "He seems straightforward enough to me," she said. Holt turned his coffee cup in his hands. "You two seem to talk some." "He checks on the kitchen," she said. "Most owners do." "Cole doesn't usually bother himself with kitchen business." Eleanor looked at him with the open, mild expression of a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide. "Perhaps the food has improved enough to merit attention," she said pleasantly. "More coffee." He held out his cup. But that evening, she found him in the provision room when she went to take the evening inventory, standing at the very shelf she had reorganized, looking at the supply records she kept there. He turned when she came in, and his expression was smooth and completely unreadable. "Just checking the flour supply," he said. "We're well stocked," she said, moving past him to the shelf with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who has every right to be there. "I ordered extra last week. Big batch of bread planned for the weekend." She reached past him for the flour barrel, and he stepped aside, and nothing happened. And it was the most frightening 2 minutes of her week. She said nothing to Cole. There was nothing actionable to say. A man standing near a shelf was not evidence of anything. But she moved the copy of her notebook from her apron to the lining of her suitcase that night, and she slept with the suitcase under her bed. Thursday came. Cole's attorney was a compact man named Aldridge, who arrived on the afternoon stage and came to the ranch in a hired buggy, and shook Eleanor's hand when Cole introduced them with the brisk respect of a man who had been told enough to understand who she was in this situation. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Cole tells me you're the one who found the discrepancies." "I noticed inconsistencies," she said. "Mr. Mercer verified them." Aldridge looked at her with sharp eyes over his spectacles. "You have a copy of your original documentation." She went and got the notebook from her suitcase and brought it to the study and set it on the desk alongside what Cole had assembled, and the three of them sat down together and went through it with the careful, unhurried attention that legal matters require. Aldridge was thorough. He asked precise questions and took precise notes and said little beyond what was necessary, which Eleanor appreciated. At the end of 2 hours, he sat back and looked at Cole. "This is sufficient," he said. "More than sufficient, in fact. The pattern is clear, the documentation is consistent, and the amounts involved make this a matter for more than termination." He paused. "You'll want the sheriff from Harlan Creek. I'd recommend we send word today, bring him out tomorrow morning." Cole was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the desk. "And Holt?" "Holt knows nothing until tomorrow morning," Aldridge said. "If he runs before the sheriff arrives—" "He won't run," Cole said with a certainty that was not bluster, but something colder and more grounded. He doesn't know what I know yet. He suspects something is off, but he doesn't know. Aldridge looked at Eleanor. How certain are you that he hasn't connected this to you? Eleanor considered that honestly. Not entirely certain, she said. He's watchful. He's smart. But he's also confident that no one would think to look in the direction I looked, because people in his position generally count on that confidence. She paused. I'd send for the sheriff tonight. Aldridge and Cole looked at each other. Tonight, Cole said. Aldridge picked up his pen. That night Eleanor cooked supper as she always did. Salt beef and roasted potatoes and the good sourdough she'd developed over the past 2 weeks. The recipe adjusted to the altitude and the particular character of the local flour. She served 14 men and 1 attorney and 1 ranch owner and 1 foreman, and she filled cups and cleared plates and said nothing that wasn't required, and felt the whole time like she was walking very carefully along the edge of something that had a long drop on one side. Holt ate with appetite. He talked with the hands about the fence repair and the projected weather, and a horse that had been favoring its left foreleg. He was completely normal. He was so completely normal that Eleanor understood watching him that whatever suspicion he carried had not yet crystallized into knowledge. He was watching, but not yet seeing. After supper, when the hands had gone and the kitchen was clean, she stood at the window in the dark and held her coffee cup and did not let herself feel anything yet. Not relief, not fear, not anticipation. She had learned that you did not spend emotions before their time. You kept them banked like a fire you needed to last through a long cold night, and you drew on them only when you had to. There was a sound at the kitchen door. A knock, 2 knocks quiet. Cole's knock. She'd learned it. "Come in," she said. He stood in the doorway. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a specific weight for too long. "The sheriff's deputy will be here at 6 tomorrow morning," he said. "Before breakfast," she said. "Before breakfast." The smallest pause. "I want you to know something." She waited. "What you did," he said. "Coming to me with what you found. Knowing what it might cost you if I'd chosen not to listen. If I'd taken Holt's side." He stopped as if choosing the next words with particular care. "That took something. I want you to know I understand that." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "I told you what I saw," she said. "That's all." "That's not all," Cole said. Quiet, direct. "You trusted me when you had no particular reason to. You'd been here 3 weeks. You had no way to know how I'd respond." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were straight with me from the first evening. That's not nothing." Cole held her gaze. Something between them settled, not dramatically, not like anything in a story. Just a small, real shift, like a door that had been slightly ajar, moving another inch open. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a hard day." "I know," she said. He nodded once and left, and Eleanor stood in the kitchen in the quiet and felt the full weight of everything she was carrying, and she set it down carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and she breathed. Tomorrow was coming. She had been walking toward hard days her whole life. She always came through them. The deputy arrived at 5:58. Eleanor heard the horse before she heard anything else, the particular sound of a horse being ridden with purpose rather than patience coming up the ranch road in the gray before full dawn. She was already at the stove. She had been at the stove since 4:15, not because breakfast required it that early, but because standing still in a kitchen with something to do with her hands was the only version of calm she had reliable access to this morning. She heard Cole's boots on the stairs. She heard the front door. She heard voices on the porch, low and deliberate, the kind of conversation that 2 men have when they are making a plan that cannot afford mistakes. She cracked eggs into the skillet and said nothing. Holt came down at his usual time, 5:40, and walked into the kitchen the way he always did, with the ease of a man entirely at home in a space he considered his to move through. He stopped when he saw Eleanor's face, not her expression. She had her expression locked down, smooth and ordinary as a swept floor. But something in her stillness, perhaps. Something in the quality of the quiet. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. "Coffee's hot." He poured his cup. He stood at the kitchen window with it, which he did not usually do. Usually he took his coffee to the table. This morning he stood at the window, and Eleanor understood he was watching the yard. She did not look up from the stove. "Cole's up early," Holt said. "He often is," she said. "There's a horse at the post I don't recognize." "Supply delivery, maybe," she said. "I put in an order for the week." Holt was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him thinking. Could feel the specific quality of a smart man's mind working on incomplete information, turning it, testing it, trying to find the shape of what he couldn't see. "Eleanor," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She registered that. "Yes," she said, still not looking up. "You and Cole been talking much lately?" She turned from the stove and looked at him with the open, mild expression she had been practicing since childhood, the expression of a woman who had nothing in the world to be concerned about. "He checks the kitchen accounts with me on Wednesdays," she said. "Standard practice, I'd think, for any responsible owner." Holt's eyes held hers for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then the front door opened and Cole walked in, and behind him came the deputy, a young man younger than Eleanor had expected, with a steady way of holding himself that suggested he'd been trained well, and behind the deputy came Aldridge, and the kitchen went very still. Holt set his coffee cup down. The sound it made on the wooden table was the loudest thing in the room. "Holt," Cole said. His voice was entirely level. "I need you to come with us to the study." Holt looked at Cole, looked at the deputy, looked at Aldridge. And Eleanor watched his face do something she had seen faces do before. She had seen it on her husband's face the night the men came to the door about the gambling debts, that specific terrible rearrangement of features when a man understands that what he has been running from has arrived. "Cole," he said. His voice was still steady. "Give him credit for that." "What's this about?" "The study," Cole said. "Now." For a moment, one long, suspended moment, Holt didn't move. Eleanor stood at the stove with the skillet in her hand, and she did not breathe, and she did not look away, and she did not let a single thing show on her face. Then Holt moved. He walked toward the study door with Cole and the deputy and Aldridge, and just before he passed through it he turned and looked back at Eleanor with eyes that had gone very flat and very cold. She held his gaze. She did not blink. He went through the door. Eleanor set the skillet down carefully, very carefully on the stovetop, and gripped the edge of the work table with both hands and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like an hour. The hands came in for breakfast, not knowing what was happening in the study. She fed them. She kept her movements normal and her voice easy, and she answered the ordinary morning questions. Yes, more coffee. Yes, the bread is fresh. No, she didn't know if Mr. Mercer would be joining them. And she held the whole ordinary performance together with the quiet, practiced competence of a woman who had learned that the most important thing you could do in a crisis was keep the people around you from knowing there was one. It took 40 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock above the kitchen door without appearing to watch it. When the study door opened and the deputy walked Holt out, not roughly, but with a firm hand at his elbow and a posture that left no ambiguity about the direction of travel, 3 of the hands at the table looked up. One of them, a young man named Cutter, who had the quickest eyes on the ranch, started to rise from his seat. "Finish your breakfast," Eleanor said without looking at him, without raising her voice. "Just said it the way you say something when you mean it absolutely." Cutter sat back down. Cole came out of the study last. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his men at the table and said in a voice that was quiet and entirely controlled, "There will be a full accounting for the crew by this evening. Right now, I need you to go to your work." Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They got up and they went the way men go when the person giving direction has earned the kind of authority that doesn't need to be performed. When the kitchen was empty, Cole sat down at the table. He sat down heavily, the way a man sits when he's been holding himself upright through an act of sustained will and has just set the will down. Eleanor poured him coffee and set it in front of him without being asked. "Thank you," he said. Then he sat for a moment with his hands around the cup. "Aldridge says the full extent is close to $4,000 over 6 years. Eleanor sat down across from him. "That's a significant loss." "It's survivable," he said in a tone that suggested he was still in the process of determining whether that was true. "The ranch is financially sound in the larger picture. He stopped. "It's the 6 years that sit wrong. 6 years and I didn't see it." "You were looking at the right things," Eleanor said. "Land, livestock, weather, operations. You were looking at what a rancher looks at. Nobody told you to look at the kitchen records." "You did," he said. "In 3 weeks." "I was new," she said. "I had no habits yet. New eyes see things that practiced eyes look past. That's not a failure of yours, it's just how it works." Cole looked at her. That quality he had, that stillness, that attention was directed at her fully now, and Eleanor felt the weight of it without letting herself react to it. She was very good at receiving full attention from powerful men without changing shape under it. She had needed to be. "What will you do now?" he said. "With Holt gone, the foreman position is open. The ranch operations will need managing while I find someone." "I'll keep making breakfast," she said. He almost smiled. That shadow of a smile again. "I suspected you might say something like that." "I'm a cook, Mr. Mercer. You hired me to cook." "I hired you to cook," he agreed. "And you reorganized my kitchen, fixed my provisioning system, identified a 6-year theft operation, documented it to legal standard, and held the household together this morning while my foreman was being escorted off the property." He paused. "So, what do you want to do now, genuinely?" Eleanor looked at him. It was a real question. She considered giving him a careful answer, a safe answer, the kind of answer a woman in her position gave a man in his position when she was still uncertain of her ground. Then she decided not to. "Your ranch books are a mess beyond the theft," she said. "The provisioning system I've fixed, but the broader financial records are inconsistent, and several of your supply contracts are overpriced compared to current market. Your cattle sale records from the last 2 years need reconciling against what Aldridge found. And whoever you hire as foreman is going to need a coherent financial system to work with, or you'll be back in the same position in 5 years. Cole Mercer looked at her for a long moment. "How long would that take you?" he said. "To do it properly, 6 weeks. 8 if the cattle records are as inconsistent as I suspect. And while you're doing that, I'll keep making breakfast," she said. "The men still need to eat." This time he did smile, small and brief and real. "Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to discuss your compensation." What followed in the weeks after Holt's removal was a period of intense, unglamorous work. The kind of work that doesn't make for dramatic stories, but makes everything else possible. Eleanor took the ranch's financial records apart and rebuilt them from the ground up. She spent mornings in the kitchen and afternoons at the desk Cole had cleared for her in the corner of the main office, working through ledgers with the focused, systematic patience she brought to every difficult task. Cole hired a temporary ranch hand to manage operations while he searched for a new foreman, and Eleanor quietly became the second organizing intelligence of Blackstone Ranch, not by announcing it, not by claiming territory, but by being the person who knew where everything was and how it all connected and what needed to happen next. The hands adapted faster than she'd expected. Men who had ignored her in the first week now came to her with questions about the supply schedule, about the food provisions for upcoming cattle work, about whether she knew when the new fencing supplies were due. She answered their questions, and she fed them well, and she did not make a production of any of it, because she had never needed other people to observe her being capable. She just needed to be capable. The observation was other people's business. It was in the 5th week of this work that she found the second problem. She almost missed it. It was embedded in the cattle sale records from 18 months prior. A set of figures that matched perfectly on the surface dates, quantities, prices, but didn't match the livestock census that Cole maintained separately. A small discrepancy. 17 head of cattle unaccounted for between 2 documents. She checked it 3 times before she was certain it wasn't her error. Then she checked it 3 more times, because what it appeared to suggest made her want to be absolutely sure. The cattle sales records Holt had maintained showed 17 fewer head sold than the census Cole had logged in the same period. But the cash receipts showed payment for all of them, which meant either the census was wrong or 17 head of cattle had been sold, and the proceeds had gone somewhere that was not the Blackstone Ranch operating account. She sat very still at the desk for a long moment. Then she got up and went to find Cole. He was in the stable, which was where he went when he needed to think she had learned this about him, as she learned everything by paying attention. She stood at the stable door. "I need to show you something," she said. He came out and she showed him right there standing at the fence with the documents between them and the late afternoon going gold around them. She walked him through it the same way she'd walked him through the first discovery, clearly without drama, letting the numbers speak. Cole was quiet for a long time after she finished. "This wasn't Holt," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "No, this predates Holt's system. The document style is different. The notation is different." "This goes back further," he said. "Yes." Cole turned and looked out over the pasture. His jaw was tight. She could see him absorbing it, the weight of it, the specific exhaustion of a man discovering that what he'd thought was one problem was in fact the surface of a deeper one. "Someone else," he said, "before Holt." "Or working with him," Eleanor said. "I don't know yet. I need more time with the records." "Then take the time." His voice was controlled but tight at the edges. "Whatever you need." She nodded. She turned to go back to the office. "Eleanor." He used her given name without appearing to notice he'd done it. She stopped. "Is there anything you need from me to continue? Anything I can do to make this easier?" She thought about it honestly. "Send the census records back 3 years, not just 18 months. I want to see the full picture." "Done," he said. "Tonight." She went back to the office. That evening she found Cutter, the young hand with the quick eyes, waiting by the kitchen door after supper. He had his hat in his hands and the expression of a man working himself up to saying something. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," she said. "Is the ranch in trouble?" Direct. Young enough to ask straight questions. She looked at him. She considered the careful answer, the reassuring answer, the answer that protected him from uncertainty. She decided, as she usually did in the end, to tell the truth. "The ranch has problems," she said. "Most ranches do. The difference is now we know what ours are and we're fixing them. That's not trouble, that's work." Cutter turned his hat in his hands. "Holt told some of the men when he left he said things, about you, about why you were really here." She went very still. "What things?" "Said you had an agenda. Said you were trying to take the ranch from Cole somehow. That you'd gone through 2 husbands and both of them had lost everything." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't believe it. I wanted you to know." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, long enough to feel the cold edge of it, the specific coldness of learning that the story about you is already moving, already taking shape in other mouths. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "What he said," Cutter said. "Is any of it true?" She looked at him directly. "I had 1 husband," she said. "He died. He left debts. I lost the house. Those are the facts." She held the young man's gaze without flinching. "The rest is Holt trying to protect himself by making me the story instead of him. That's what men like that do when the ground shifts under them." Cutter nodded slowly. He looked relieved and troubled at the same time, which Eleanor thought was probably the appropriate response to accurate information. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He put his hat back on. "Thank you." He left, and Eleanor stood in the kitchen doorway and let herself feel the full weight of what he'd just told her. Holt's words would spread. Maybe they already had. That was how these things worked. A story with enough specific detail, enough half-truth mixed into it, moved faster than correction. And she was a plus-size widow with no family in this county and no history that anyone here could verify, and all it took was a story. She understood that the fight was not over. It had only moved to different ground. She went back inside and picked up the cattle records and kept working, because that was what she knew how to do, and because the numbers on the page were real in a way that stories about her were not, and because when morning came, she would need to know the full picture. Whatever was coming, she intended to see it clearly before it arrived. The story Holt told spread faster than Eleanor had estimated. Monday, she could feel it in the room, the way you feel a temperature drop, not in any single thing, but in the aggregate of small things. The way two of the hands went quiet when she came through the bunkhouse doorway to deliver the noon supply list. The way Mrs. Pryor avoided her eyes at breakfast. The way one of the seasonal workers, a broad man named Jessup, who had always been easy enough with her, turned his shoulder when she passed him in the yard. She said nothing. She fed people. She worked the records. She kept her face smooth and her movements unhurried, and she gave nobody anything to read. But she counted the silences. She was a woman who had learned to count silences the way a navigator counts stars, not because the counting changed anything, but because you needed to know exactly where you were. The story, as near as she could piece it together from what Cutter had told her and what she could hear underneath the behavior of people around her, was this: Eleanor Mercer had come to Blackstone Ranch under false pretenses. She had manufactured evidence against Holt to secure her own position. She had designs on the ranch on coal, and was using manufactured financial confusion to make herself indispensable. Her first husband had lost everything because of her. She had moved from town to town, leaving debt and ruin behind her. It was a good story. She had to give Holt that. It was built from enough real material: the dead husband, the debts, the house lost, the moving, that it had weight. It had the particular texture of truth that lies require to travel. She heard the version Cole had been given on Thursday morning when he came into the kitchen, before the hands arrived, with the tight, controlled expression of a man who had spent the night deciding how to approach something difficult. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "I've heard some things," he said, "from men in town. From Aldridge, who was told by the county clerk, who was told by someone who spoke to Holt after his release on bail." He paused. "I want to hear your version before I tell you what I've heard, because I'd rather know what's true before I know what's being said." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Ask me what you want to know." "Your husband," he said. "Thomas Graves. How did he die?" "Fever," she said. "The winter of '76. It was quick." "The debts?" "Gambling," she said. "His, not mine. I didn't know the extent of them until after he died. The house was collateral on a loan I knew nothing about. The creditors came inside a month." "You've worked in other households since then?" "2. A family in Dodge City for 8 months and a boarding house in Caldwell before that. I can give you names. Both will speak to my character and my work." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Holt is claiming you falsified the provision records, that you invented the discrepancies to create grounds for his removal." Eleanor felt something cold move through her chest. She breathed through it. "The original provision records are the ones I found in the kitchen on my second morning here," she said. "I did not create them. I did not alter them. The originals are with Aldridge. Ask him to verify the handwriting against mine. Ask him to verify the paper age. Ask him whatever he needs to verify." "I already have," Cole said. "He's confident the records are genuine." She let that land without letting the relief show. "Then Holt is lying." "Yes," Cole said, simply. "He is." He looked at her. "I'm not asking because I doubt you. I'm asking because I want you to know exactly what's been said, and I want you to know that I've already looked at it carefully, and I'm telling you directly I don't believe it." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. There was something very particular about being told you are believed by someone who had clear reasons not to. It landed differently than easy trust. It landed like something earned. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve accurate information about your situation. Holt's attorney is making noise about counterclaims. It won't go anywhere. Aldridge is confident about that, but it will be noisy. People in Harlan Creek will hear things. Some of them will believe things." He held her gaze. I want to know if you can hold steady through that." "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I have held steady through significantly worse." He nodded once. "I expect you have." He got up and poured his own coffee, which he had never done in her kitchen before, and she understood it as the particular gesture. It was not dramatic, not announced, just a small repositioning of the ordinary. She went back to the records. The deeper problem in the cattle census occupied her fully for the next 4 days. She worked backward through 3 years of records, the way you work backward through a knot. Not pulling, just following the thread. Finding where each loop connected to the next, tracing the pattern until the shape of the whole thing became visible. What she found was not what she had expected. The missing cattle. 17 head then, when she went back further, 31 head across 3 years, had not been stolen in the way Holt's provisions theft had been stolen. They had been sold. The sales were recorded. The payments had been received. But the payments had gone into an account that was not the Blackstone Ranch operating account. A separate account in a different bank in a different county under a name she didn't recognize. She wrote the name down on a separate piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. Daniel Graves, her husband's name. Her dead husband's name. She sat very still at the desk in the corner of Cole's office with the paper in front of her and the name on it, and she breathed very carefully the way you breathe when the ground has shifted under you and you need to be certain you're still standing before you take a step. Thomas Graves had been her husband. Daniel Graves had been his brother, his younger brother, who she had met twice in the entirety of her marriage, and who she had understood from those 2 meetings, and from what Thomas had told her in dark moments, to be a man who specialized in attaching himself to other people's chaos and profiting from it. Daniel Graves was supposed to be in Missouri. She took the paper with the name on it and the cattle records, and she went to find Cole immediately. She did not wait until evening. She did not take time to compose herself or organize what she would say. She went directly because the calculation had changed. Cole was in the yard speaking with the temporary hand about the fence line when she came out. He saw her face and said something brief to the hand and walked toward her. "What is it?" he said. She handed him the paper with the name on it. He read it, looked up at her. "Who is Daniel Graves?" "My husband's brother," she said. The silence that followed was very short and very loud. "Tell me everything," Cole said. They went inside. She told him everything she knew about Daniel Graves, which was not much, but was enough the 2 meetings. Thomas's warnings, the understanding she had that Daniel made his living, moving between other people's disasters, like a man walking between raindrops, never quite getting wet himself. She told him about the account, the timeline, the amounts. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You think he's connected to Holt. I think that account existed before Holt," she said. "I think the cattle skimming started before Holt. And I think when Holt arrived and began his own operation, whoever was running the cattle account either brought him in or Holt found the account and used it as leverage. Or both. And now that Holt has been arrested, whoever held that account knows the investigation has started," Eleanor said. "And they know my name is attached to it." The look on Cole's face shifted into something harder and more focused. "How long ago did Holt make bail?" 8 days, she said. And the story started, within 2 days of that. Cole stood up. He went to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the specific posture of a man putting pieces together and not liking the picture they made. "He's not just trying to protect himself," Cole said. "He's directing attention, moving the story to you before someone looks further." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Which means there's someone further to find." "Yes." Cole turned around. "I need to wire Aldridge tonight." "I know," she said. "I need you to do something else first." He waited. "I need you to tell me honestly," she said, "whether the fact that this connects to my husband's name to my family changes anything for you." It was a direct question. She asked it directly because she had learned that the questions you danced around were the ones that wounded you when the answer finally came sideways. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Does it change the fact that you brought this to me the moment you found it, even knowing it implicated your own family's name? No, she said. Then it doesn't change anything, he said. She let that settle. The wire to Aldridge went out that evening. The reply came the following morning, and it was not what either of them had hoped for. Aldridge had already encountered the name. Daniel Graves encountered it in Holt's own defense filing, which had been submitted 2 days prior. Holt's attorney was arguing that Eleanor had manufactured the provision discrepancies in coordination with her brother-in-law Daniel Graves as part of a scheme to destabilize Blackstone Ranch's finances and acquire it through Cole Mercer's subsequent financial difficulties. Eleanor read the wire twice. Then she set it on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. They had moved faster than she'd expected. They had not just spread a story, they had filed it, made it legal, made it something that would have to be answered in a formal context with documents and testimony, and the particular machinery of law that ground slowly and loudly and left marks. Eleanor. Cole's voice was careful. This doesn't— I know what this is, she said. She heard her own voice steady, which surprised her because underneath the steadiness, she was frightened in a way she had not been frightened in a long time. Not of Holt, not of Daniel Graves, but of the machinery, of the way a story once filed and stamped and entered into record became its own kind of reality that had to be dismantled piece by piece while the whole town watched. It's a counteroffensive. He knows the financial evidence against him is solid, so he's making the story about me, making the court deal with my credibility instead of his theft. Aldridge says it won't hold, Cole said. Aldridge may be right, Eleanor said. But it has to be answered, formally, publicly. She paused. In Harlan Creek, where everyone already heard the first version of the story. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you need? She looked at him. I need to go to Harlan Creek. When? Tomorrow, she said. Before this gets further ahead of us. I need to speak with Aldridge in person, and I need to find out how much of what Holt filed is actually attributable to Daniel Graves, because if Daniel is in this county— She stopped. If he's in this county, Cole said quietly, he's not just running a legal strategy, he's here for something. Yes, she said. And I'd rather know what before he decides to make his next move. That evening was the hardest of the ones Eleanor had spent at Blackstone Ranch, which was saying something because none of them had been easy. She sat in the kitchen after supper was cleared, and the hands had gone, and she allowed herself for the first time to feel the full weight of what was bearing down on her. She had come here with nothing, a suitcase and a skill and a determination to rebuild something from the wreckage of what had been taken from her. She had done everything right. She had found the theft and reported it honestly. She had worked the records and fixed the systems and fed the men and kept herself straight and clear and above reproach. And now her dead husband's brother was using her name in a legal filing, and the town was hearing a story about her that was built from the bones of her real life. And she was going to have to stand up in public in a town that already half believed the worst of her, and answer for something she hadn't done. There was a knock on the kitchen door. 2 knocks. Cole's knock. Come in, she said. He sat down across from her at the work table. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just sat there, which she had come to understand was one of the things he did when he was being present with something difficult, and didn't have words that were adequate to it. I'm not going to lose this, she said. Not bravado. Just a statement of fact she was making for her own benefit as much as his. No, he said. You're not. I've never run from something because it got hard, she said. I know, he said. I need you to know that, she said. Whatever happens in Harlan Creek, whatever they say, I need you to know I'm not the story they're telling. Cole Mercer looked at her across the work table in the quiet kitchen, and his face had that quality she'd seen in it before, the window not closed, but open properly. Open the way it opened when he'd decided something. I already know that, he said. I've known it since the 3rd week you were here. She held his gaze. I'll ride with you tomorrow, he said, to Harlan Creek. She wanted to tell him she didn't need him to, that she was capable of handling this herself, had always handled things herself, had been handling things herself for so long that it had become indistinguishable from who she was. She wanted to say all of that. Instead, she said, "All right, because some things you did alone, and some things you did better, beside someone who had decided to stand with you, and knowing the difference was its own kind of strength." Tomorrow was Harlan Creek, and Eleanor Mercer had never in her life walked toward a hard thing looking away from it. They rode into Harlan Creek at 9:30 in the morning, and Eleanor felt the town before she saw it react to her, felt it in the way people on the boardwalk slowed their step, the way conversation shifted register, the particular stillness that moves through a small town when something it has been talking about walks through the door. She sat straight on the wagon bench. She did not look away from the road ahead. She had dressed carefully that morning, her best dress, the dark blue wool she had kept from before, the one that had survived the loss of everything else because she had been wearing it the day the creditors came and had walked out in it and never gone back. It was well made, and it fit her as she was, fully and without apology. And she had looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand before leaving and decided that she looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had done nothing wrong and intended to say so clearly. Cole drove. He had not spoken much on the ride, in which suited her. She did not need conversation. She needed to think. Aldridge met them outside his office on the main street, and he had a look on his face that Eleanor read immediately as the expression of a man who has new information and is calculating how to present it. "He's here," Aldridge said before they'd fully stopped. "Daniel Graves. He came in on yesterday's stage. He's at the hotel." Eleanor felt Cole go still beside her. She felt it in the slight change of his posture, the way a man goes still when he is making a decision about how to respond to something. "How do you know?" Cole said. "Because he came to my office yesterday afternoon," Aldridge said. "Introduced himself, said he was here to provide testimony in support of Holt's defense." He looked at Eleanor directly. "He said some things about you, Mrs. Mercer. I want you to hear them from me before you hear them in the street." "Tell me," she said, Aldridge told her. He was direct and efficient about it, which she appreciated. Daniel Graves had told Aldridge that Eleanor had a history of entering households under false pretenses, cultivating relationships with men of property, and manufacturing crises that made her indispensable. He claimed she had done this twice before. He claimed to have documentation. Eleanor listened to all of it without changing her expression. "Does he have documentation?" she said. "He claims to." "What kind?" "Letters. He says you wrote letters to a contact in Dodge City, discussing your strategy for Blackstone Ranch before you arrived." The silence that followed was very brief and very complete. Then Eleanor said, "I would like to see those letters." Aldridge looked at her. "You seem unsurprised." "I'm not unsurprised," she said. "I'm controlled. There's a difference." She looked at Aldridge steadily. "I wrote no such letters. Whatever he has is fabricated or misattributed. If I can see them, I can tell you exactly what they are and where they came from." Cole spoke for the first time since Aldridge had started talking. "Can you compel their production before the hearing?" "I've already filed the request," Aldridge said. "We'll have them this afternoon." He paused. "There's one more thing." Eleanor waited. "The hearing has been moved up," Aldridge said. "Sheriff McGuire wants it done this week. The county judge is passing through on Friday, and he's agreed to hear the preliminary matter. That gives us 4 days. 4 days. Eleanor breathed through the tightening in her chest and kept her face clear. 4 days to answer a legal filing built on fabricated letters and her dead husband's brother's testimony in a town that had been hearing the wrong story for 2 weeks. "Then we'd better get started," she said, and walked into Aldridge's office. The letters arrived at 3 o'clock that afternoon, delivered by the sheriff's deputy, with the particular formality of documents that have been assigned legal weight. Eleanor sat at Aldridge's desk and read them carefully, both of them twice through. They were good. She had to acknowledge that. They were written in a hand close enough to hers to be convincing at a glance on paper that had been aged in a way that suggested time but would not survive close examination, and they contained specific details about Blackstone Ranch and Cole Mercer that were accurate enough to seem real. The details were accurate, because they were drawn from a notice in the Harlan Creek Gazette from 6 months prior. A brief item about Blackstone Ranch's expanded cattle operation that would have been available to anyone who read the county papers. She knew this because she remembered the notice. She had read it herself in the reading room of the Caldwell boarding house, where she'd worked when she was looking through the Kansas papers for employment opportunities. She set the letters down. The details in these letters, she said, come from a Gazette notice published in April. I can find the notice. I can show the dates. Anyone who read the county papers could have written these letters using that notice as a source. They are not evidence of prior knowledge. They are evidence that someone read a newspaper. Aldridge leaned forward. Can you prove you didn't write them? I can prove where I was when they were supposedly written, she said. I was in Caldwell. The boarding house family will attest to that. And the handwriting is close, but it isn't mine. The letter form on the capital E is wrong. Mine curves left. These curve right. She held up one of the letters next to a piece of paper on which she'd written her name. It's subtle, but a careful examiner will see it. Aldridge looked at both papers for a long moment. Then he looked at Cole, who had been standing near the window, reading the letters over Eleanor's shoulder. She's right, Cole said. The E is different. I'll need a handwriting examiner, Aldridge said. I know a man in Wichita. 4 days isn't enough time for Wichita, Eleanor said. Is there anyone in Harlan Creek, a school teacher, a document clerk, someone with enough experience of handwriting analysis to testify to the difference? Aldridge thought for a moment. The county clerk has been examining documents for 30 years. Get her, Eleanor said. The next 3 days were among the most concentrated of Eleanor's life. She worked with Aldridge in the mornings on the legal preparation, the timeline the Gazette noticed the Caldwell references, the handwriting comparison, and she spent the afternoons doing something that Aldridge had not suggested and Cole had not asked for, but that she had decided was necessary. She talked to people, not about the case, not in any way that could be read as campaigning or soliciting sympathy. She simply moved through Harlan Creek the way she moved through any kitchen she'd ever worked in, present unhurried herself, and she talked to people the way she always had. The woman at the dry goods store who had a question about preserving methods. The wife of one of the ranch hands who was struggling with a sick child and needed someone to tell her the fever would break. The elderly man at the feed store who wanted to talk about the old days and found that Eleanor was genuinely interested in listening. She did not perform warmth. She did not manufacture connection. She was simply who she was in public, without the carefully maintained neutrality she had held at the ranch when she was uncertain of her ground. Cole watched her do it. She was aware of him watching in the way she was always aware of him, not intrusively, but with the background awareness of someone whose presence had become a fixed point in her landscape. He didn't interfere. He didn't guide or manage or suggest. He watched the way he watched everything, with the quality of attention that was also a kind of respect. On the third evening, sitting in Aldridge's office, going over the final preparation, he said, "You know half this town by name now." "I know the people I've spoken to," she said. "That's different from knowing half the town." 3 days, he said. "People are not complicated to know if you listen to them properly," she said. "Most people spend most of their time waiting for someone to actually hear what they're saying. If you do that, if you actually listen, they tell you everything about themselves very quickly." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you did with me at the ranch?" She looked at him. It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct answer. "Yes," she said. "And what I heard was someone worth telling the truth to." Something moved across his face. That open window look fully open now. "Eleanor," he said. "The hearing is tomorrow," she said. "Let's finish the preparation." He looked at her for a moment longer, then he picked up the papers. The hearing was held in the county courthouse at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, and it was not private. Eleanor had not expected it to be in a town this size. Nothing legal was private, and the preliminary matter of Holt's counterclaim against her had attracted the particular attention of people who had been hearing two versions of a story and wanted to see which one stood up when pressed. The room was full. She walked in with Aldridge on one side and Cole one step behind her, and she felt the attention of the room land on her. The way attention always landed as weight as pressure, as the particular force of many people looking at one person and deciding what they see. She did not adjust her posture. She did not look around for friendly faces or avoid the unfriendly ones. She walked to her place at the table and sat down and put her hands flat on the surface in front of her and looked at the judge's bench and waited. Daniel Graves was already seated across the room. She had not seen him in 6 years. He was thinner than she remembered, with the particular sharpness of a man who had spent those years in circumstances that wore rather than built. He looked at her when she came in, and his expression did something complicated: recognition and calculation, and something underneath that she might in another context have called guilt. She looked at him for exactly as long as it took to understand what she was dealing with. Then she looked away. The hearing moved quickly. Judge Harmon was a precise man who did not allow ornamentation in his courtroom. He wanted facts, documents, testimony, and he moved through them with the focused efficiency of someone who had been cutting through noise to find signal for 30 years. Holt's attorney presented the letters. He was good, organized, confident, building the narrative with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times. Daniel Graves testified. He was smooth. He told the story of Eleanor's supposed scheme with enough specific detail to sound credible, and she watched the room respond to it, the small shifts of posture that meant people were being persuaded. Then Aldridge stood up. He presented the Gazette notice first, read the date, read the specific details that appeared in both the notice and the fabricated letters, established the timeline that showed Eleanor had been in Caldwell, employed and documented at the time the letters were supposedly written, presented the written attestation from the Caldwell boarding house family she had wired them 4 days ago, and they had responded with a detailed signed statement that arrived yesterday morning. Then he called the county clerk. Martha Hess had been examining documents for the county for 31 years, and she testified with the calm certainty of someone who did not particularly care what anyone thought of her conclusions, because her conclusions were based on facts. She put Eleanor's writing and the fabricated letters side by side in front of the judge. She explained the letter form differences. She pointed to the specific divergences, the capital E, the way Eleanor connected her letters in the middle of words, the particular pressure pattern of her pen hand that produced a distinctive light stroke on upward movements that the fabricated letters did not replicate. These letters, Martha Hess said in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, were not written by the same hand. In my professional opinion, they are not even close. The room shifted. Eleanor felt it, that change in collective attention when the weight of evidence tips definitively in a direction, and the people watching understand that the story they've been told is not the story that's true. Holt's attorney tried. He was professional about it. He pushed back on the handwriting analysis, questioned the Caldwell timeline, raised points about the cattle account that still bore the Graves name. Aldridge answered every point. Eleanor sat at the table and let it happen around her, and held herself very still, the way you hold a lamp very still when the wind is moving. Judge Harmon did not take long. He was the kind of judge who did his thinking while he listened, and when the testimony concluded, he was quiet for approximately 45 seconds, Eleanor counted, and then he looked up from his papers. "The counterclaim against Mrs. Eleanor Mercer is dismissed," he said. "The documentation presented does not support the allegations, and the primary evidence offered, the letters, has been credibly challenged as fabricated. Mrs. Mercer's testimony regarding the Blackstone Ranch financial irregularities stands as submitted." He looked at Holt's table over his spectacles. "The original matter against Mr. Holt proceeds." He closed his ledger. The room exhaled. Eleanor did not exhale. Not yet. She sat at the table for a moment with her hands flat in front of her, and she let the reality of it settle. The specific reality of a thing you have worked very hard toward arriving, finally, undeniably as fact. Daniel Graves left his seat quickly. She was aware of it in her peripheral vision, the movement of a man who understood the ground had shifted and was recalculating. She did not watch him go. She did not have anything to say to him. What happened next with Daniel Graves was a matter for Aldridge and the law, and she was content to leave it there. She stood up. She gathered her papers. She turned. Cole was standing behind her, and the look on his face was not triumph. He was not a man who wore triumph easily, but something steadier and more lasting than triumph. Something that looked, she thought, a great deal like respect, that had finished the long process of becoming something more than respect. "Let's go home," he said. She looked at him. The word landed home, and she turned it over for a moment, the weight and the rightness of it, the way it fit the space it had been put in. "Yes," she said. They walked out of the courthouse together, and Eleanor felt the room watch them go. And she did not look back, because she had learned a long time ago that you did not look back at the place where you'd been made to prove yourself. You walked forward. You kept your chin level and your step steady, and you walked into whatever came next. What came next was the ranch and the work, and the long process of rebuilding something that had been damaged by years of quiet theft and neglect. What came next was teaching Cutter how to read a ledger and sitting with Mrs. Pryor on Sunday evenings and explaining the provisioning system until the older woman understood it well enough to manage it herself. What came next was Cole riding the east pasture fence line with Eleanor beside him in the early morning, not saying much the way people who understand each other don't need to fill silence with noise. What came next was a woman named Ruth, who arrived 3 months later looking for work, who had the same worn suitcase look Eleanor recognized from the inside, and who Eleanor hired as kitchen assistant, and then over the following year taught everything she knew: the accounting, the provisioning, the careful management of resources that kept a household and an operation running honestly and well. Ruth taught the woman who came after her. That woman taught 2 more. It was not a dramatic thing, the spreading of it. It did not happen in a single moment or a public gesture. It happened the way real things happen, slowly, person to person. One honest conversation at a time, in kitchens and across work tables and in the margins of ledgers that began to add up correctly for the first time. Blackstone Ranch became something in those years that Cole had not planned, and Eleanor had not set out to build it, became a place that people pointed to when they talked about what a well-run operation looked like. And more than that, a place where women who arrived with nothing were given something real, not charity, not pity, but work and knowledge, and the demonstrated proof that competence was its own authority. That a woman who knew her numbers and her systems and herself could not be reduced to someone else's story about her. Eleanor Mercer had arrived at Blackstone Ranch with a worn suitcase and a set of kitchen knives and a document that proved who she was. She had been hired out of desperation by a man who needed a cook and had no particular expectations beyond that. She had been looked at and sized up and found wanting by people who decided what she was before she had spoken a word. Every single one of them had been wrong, not because Eleanor Mercer was exceptional though she was, but because the people who had underestimated her had made the oldest mistake there is. They had looked at the surface of a person and believed they had seen the whole thing, when the whole thing was immeasurably larger and more lasting than anything visible from the outside. She had known that about herself for a long time. She had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. And in the end, it did.